Modernizing the public sector isn't easy. Governments are under pressure to deliver faster, more digital citizen services, but they also carry the heaviest burdens around security, compliance, and public trust. At the same time, AI and cloud are opening possibilities that could redefine how governments serve their people. In today's episode of An Eye on AI, we have with us Prakash Patni, Managing Director of Digital Transformation for IBM Cloud for regulated industries, to talk about how the public sector can embrace this next wave of technology without compromising on the fundamentals. Prakash, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Public sector is unique and different from other organizations when it comes to embracing and adopting new modern technologies. There are so much they have to consider before jumping to adopt a new technology. What challenges are public sector organizations facing as they try to modernize while also meeting strict security and compliance requirement, at the same time ensure that citizen trust is not eroded?
Yeah, exactly as you say. I think even though cloud's been around for a while and many organizations and industries have adopted it, there are specific challenges within public sector. Public sector, as you know, deals with very private information. It could be healthcare records, financial records, identity records, tax records. So for them, it's even more important than other industries to make sure that that data stays secure and safe. So one of the biggest challenges is around how do you make sure that data remains safe and secure and protected, especially as you start migrating these workloads to the cloud, especially as you start using different, external software and third-party vendors. So, we're increasingly seeing bad actors target those sort of organizations in order to gain access to systems of governments or other regulated industries. So that is one of the biggest challenges. And that's one of the areas that we've been very much focused on addressing through things like solutions for our confidential compute. You're also seeing some things around sovereignty come in now. It's becoming a big issue as well around who has access to the data and where's the data going, etc. But as you say, that is one of the big issues when it comes to modernizing and data protection.
Now, in addition to cloud, when we look at AI, it creates a totally different kind of challenge there. Privacy, data lake, so many variables that we may not even be able to comprehend in the very beginning. Can you talk about what kind of challenges there are and how you folks help navigate through those challenges?
If you take the data challenge that I spoke about, the whole privacy thing, that gets magnified with AI, right? So in order for models to be trained, in order for them to be able to automate workflows and things, they need access to data. Now, one of the big issues is what's happening to that data. So there's concern about loss of control. Is that data getting absorbed into models? Is it going to be inadvertently exposed? Because some of these large language models, that's what they do. They absorb a lot of information and then it gets reused. There's those sort of challenges which are definitely magnified, but there's also things around bias. So if you're going to be using these tools to make decisions, depending on how you train them, you need to avoid that. There's explainability, especially if you're giving certain people, if you're using the models in government entities to give people access to healthcare or whatever it is, in terms of those decision-making processes, then again, that becomes another important thing. So those, if I was going to pick out like the top three, those would be the ones that I would consider and raise. Now, in terms of how we're tackling those issues, from our point of view, from IBM's point of view, one of the things we've always said from the start, and even when we designed our solutions, is that the data is the customer's data. We won't take it, we won't use it to in ways outside of what's been deemed and by the client themselves. Secondly, we have a Gen AI tool, Watsonx, which has been very much built for regulated industries and for enterprises, and explainability, trust, openness is at the heart of how we've designed it. So we call it, we rinse it for things like profanity, for bias, etc., copyright, etc. So we very confident that the solution that we have built will be fit for purpose and address many of these concerns that you've just that you've raised and I've sort of elaborated on when it comes to the use of AI, especially in public sector.
Now, if we just flip it and look at these two technologies, cloud and AI, how can the problem become the solution? How can public sector leverage cloud and AI to address some of these challenges?
I think the way to think about this is that cloud unleashed a whole lot of capability, right? So it allowed them to modernize, they could cut costs, they had a lot of legacy technology that they didn't necessarily need to upgrade. They could step change to the use of cloud and gain all these benefits. Now, some of the things that we did learn was cloud's not the answer to everything. You've got to think about where you place your workloads, how you modernize. Otherwise, it can end up being, in some cases, more costly. But what that does is it gives you the foundation on which to build. So AI is built on that foundation. So together they become a very powerful tool. And the other key thing around this is taking a hybrid approach, because there's always that challenge of upgrading, modernizing legacy systems. And it can, some data is very sensitive and they don't want to put that onto the cloud, for example. So organizations will leave it on premises in their own data centers. But then you can get complexities of how do you have the AI be able to access data that's on the cloud and on premises. And that's why this hybrid approach comes in. And again, everything we've built is based around solving for a hybrid world. And this is where most organizations have now ended up, is running some workloads on-prem, some on the cloud. AI then has the challenge of being able to gain access to this data in all of these different places. So it could be multiple clouds, right? And multiple on-premises data centers. So these are some of the things that people are grappling with. But to your point, putting AI and cloud together really allow organizations to accelerate how they solve for many of their problems. And some of the things that we're seeing usage is around healthcare. So you've seen it there where they're using it to rapidly analyze scans and things. We're seeing it in chatbots and accelerating how citizens interact. We're seeing it in financial transactions in terms of how governments are interacting with their citizens there as well. So these are just many of the things that we're seeing AI plus cloud help organize, help governments actually move forward and make life better for their citizens.
You mentioned bias. It might be out of scope of this discussion, and it's also a very complicated topic. Bias can be very regional. It could be culture specific. I was talking to someone from UAE and they created Falcon AI because they felt that Western based AI models were biased. So, how do you ensure that the bias is also region specific, because bias from one culture can influence a different culture altogether? So it's a complicated thing, but what do you do to ensure there's no bias as such?
That's a tough question. I mean, some of what we've done is our AI models have, from the start, we built a governance layer into it. So it has very stringent rules that you would build around it. So it doesn't go off and start doing things outside of those guardrails that you very clearly identified. But the other piece is also the models are only as good as the data that you use to train them. So if you are having, if there have been instances where people have taken data which have been, you're feeding it biased data, so it's going to come out with a biased answer. So there's two elements here. One is having that very strong governance layer, and for us, we have something called Watson AI governance that we use to help manage this. But the other piece we have is really spending that time looking at the data that's going in and ensuring that it's as clean as possible, right, to avoid some of those biases. So I think those are the two mechanisms that I would advocate around, at least being able to minimize this. But the other one is really then just the explainability. So if you have that track record of how the AI model has got to the answer that it's got to, being able to see, having that path will also give you evidence around whether there's bias being introduced. So those are some of the things I think we can do to help mitigate some of that.
Thank you so much. Now, let's just talk about cloud again. While the term cloud just means cloud, but the fact is that different vendors, different clouds, they have their own advantages. One cloud may excel in one area, other in another area, which also means that not all clouds are created equal. Can you talk about when it comes to public sector, why is it so important for government agencies to choose a platform where security and compliance controls are built in from ground up?
I think it's really important to not just look. It's important to look beyond just I guess, the bells and whistles, right? So there's a lot. Cloud gives you immense capabilities. There's so many things that you can do using all the services that are available on the cloud. The thing we did that I think is slightly different, and something I would think agencies, government agencies and public sector bodies think about, is what makes it easier for you to adopt cloud. So one of the things I hear when I talk to regulated industries is it takes us months, if not years. It costs us hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to instrument each cloud. It's because you can't use the cloud out of the box. You have to go and within whatever industry, especially regulated industries, you have a whole set of controls that the regulators expect you to implement before you move any workload to the cloud. So that's all work that everyone's constantly having to do. So one of the approaches that we've taken, which is different, is creating a cloud for regulated industries. So be it financial services, be it public sector, government, healthcare, etc. We go and look at the regulations and the controls that need to be embedded into the cloud, and we will do that work for the client effectively. So when you look at any of the IBM Cloud solutions, it's, we have what we call IBM Cloud for industries, right? Financial services, healthcare, etc. And those are ones where we've embedded those control sets in. So it's great having all these capabilities, but if your data isn't secure, if your cloud isn't secure, then it only takes one breach before all that trust is lost. So one of the things I would advocate for and encourage organizations to look at is, who has built that security and that control layer, so that it makes it much easier and quicker for you to adopt the cloud and get to the business value, because your business value isn't in building controls right into whatever version of cloud you're using. So that's some of the, I think, the difference and that I would advocate.
Since you look at the global market, have you noticed that there are certain regions, certain countries which are ahead when it comes to cloud and AI adoption, whereas some countries, some regions are still lagging?
I think most regions, I'm in a global role, so I get to see what's going on everywhere from Asia Pac to North America to EMEA to Africa, etc. Everyone's on the cloud journey. I think everyone's seen the value and is moving towards it. There's different paces of adoption. Some areas in Europe are a bit more conservative. The US is further ahead. Asia Pac is further ahead in their level of adoption. Some of this is being driven by the regulations that are in place. The EMEA region with the EU have some quite strict regulations when it comes, and they're quite forward looking. So there's the AI Act, which came out not too long ago. There's quite a lot around DORA, which is Digital Operational Resiliency Act, etc. So the regulators are a little bit more active in certain geographies, and that's making it, I wouldn't say harder, but there's more work to be done before certain types of workloads can be moved to the cloud. Other areas, the regulations are slightly less stringent, and so maybe there's further movement. So I would say it's less about people thinking, is it a good idea or not? I think everyone's accepted that, everyone's moving there. I think the pace is being driven somewhat by people's risk appetite. So the types of industries that are moving, and also the regulations are driving some of the pace of adoption that we're seeing.
Thank you so much. Public trust is such a delicate balance. Have you seen any ideal approaches where agencies introduce AI into citizen services in a way that improves the experience but doesn't raise new concerns about bias, privacy, or transparency, where it is not just about a checklist, but right process in place to ensure these concerns are taken care of?
Yeah, no, I think it's I think every organization, even within different government entities, is different. But some of the things that we have seen that have worked have been starting with less sensitive data and doing things which are more externally facing. So we have seen people adopt be it AI and cloud in more like the market research type of things, or the chatbot, the interaction side of things. So what that allows you to do is to understand the technology, what works, what doesn't. It also allows you to build skills within your organization, because that's one of the other challenges, especially within public sector, is getting access to the people, the security, the cyber people, let alone the cloud and the AI type people, right? But by doing that, you start building that capability, and it's at a lower risk threshold, so you're not exposing potentially sensitive information. As you learn, what works, what doesn't, you then sort of move into the more sensitive data areas before you get to the really sensitive data, which might be tax or health record and things like that. So taking that sort of approach is one of the things that we've seen work well. So you're not suddenly putting your organization at risk by when you have low level skills or experience, etc. The other important thing is to work with partners who understand the technology, understand your industry. So for us, having spent many decades running mission critical workloads, we really understand all of the facets and capabilities you need, especially when it comes to security, resilience, compliance, etc. So we often find it's much easier when we're working with clients for us to even point things out, as opposed to your point, it's not a checklist. It's we're working in partnership with them and pointing things out, what they could do differently, better based on the experiences that we have. So I think it's a combination of taking that learning approach, but also working with strong partners who have the skills and capabilities and can help you accelerate to solving your problem and getting to the endpoint that you want to.
Now, one concern that we often hear is, and it has a lot to do with data gravity, is that cloud adoption in government can lead to vendor lock-in. How should agencies think about flexibility and choice when building on a regulated cloud platform?
Yeah, no, and it's a really good point there. There's quite a lot of studies here in the UK. There's been exercises done by the various regulators who believe there's too much concentration risk. So if people don't realize that they could all be on the same, all the government agents, or a large percentage of government agencies could all be running on the same cloud. If that cloud went down for a period of time, they'd all get impacted. We have that same issue in financial services. Many banks don't realize their payment process is all running on the same cloud, and you could suddenly impact a large percentage of payment processing and things like that. So the regulators are pushing very hard for not just the vendor lock-in, but resiliency and making sure you've thought about being able to move things quickly to other places. So that's a real concern and issue. So this really comes down to how you design for your solution when you start moving it to the cloud. In the early days, we just saw people going all in on one cloud. They built everything very tied to that cloud and that cloud's capability, and it became very hard for them if the regulator came to them and said, what's your exit strategy? Or if you had to move to another cloud, how would you do it? So from designing from the get-go to be hybrid multi-cloud is really important, because you will then make certain strategic decisions about how you architect things to be able to move it quickly. I have seen examples where people have gone through classification of saying, I need to be able to move this workload in a week, this one in day, this one in an hour, this one in minutes, right? If something went wrong or something happened. And so they've architected them in a way to be able to do that. Now, that does give you certain restrictions, because not all services are common across all clouds. So they've had to design in a way that said, okay, these are all the services that are common across all clouds, and therefore I have to build the apps I need to move really quickly in a way that can use those services that won't get tied to particular services on particular clouds, etc. So again, this is really all about hybrid by design and thinking about the workload, where it will go, how quickly it will need to move, etc. So these are some of the things I think you need to think about and consider.
Have you seen any practical examples where AI and cloud together actually improved the citizen experience directly?
Yeah, and there's multiple examples around. So in Australia, they've used it to, especially with the new thing now is agentic AI, right? So It's where you're not just using AI to ask it prompts and questions, where now you're giving it a goal and saying, solve this problem, and it takes the data, analyzes it, it takes a set of actions, it then looks at the results and improves, over time. So we've seen that in Australia, for example, where they use it to improve how permits are issued. We've seen it in a lot of the chatbot type, interactions that citizens can have. So instead of phoning up a line, they use the chatbots to be able to answer specific questions. We've seen it in healthcare. We mentioned about analyzing different records. So we've seen that in the UK, where they're using it to speed up some of the health assessment. We've even seen it in disaster recovery, right? So when there's a disaster, we've seen aid agencies look at how they would get the right help to the right places through the whole, how do they route logistics and things like that. So there's many examples now where AI is being embedded into government and the processes that they have to improve that citizen experience.
I work in this tech space and I get overwhelmed with all the innovation that is happening here. For leaders in government IT, it can feel even more overwhelming. What are the practical steps they should take or they can take to start moving towards this secure AI-enabled future without disrupting critical services and without eroding citizen trust as well?
I think with all this, it's important to do the hard work up front. So we often see people get excited by the hype, be it AI or cloud before that, and whatever comes next, quantum, etc. And people are like, oh, my business has come to me and said, quick, we have to do something here, and they run around and do something, and then they don't see the return on investment. So that's one of the things we hear around AI, for example. We see people are finding it, they've got caught up in the hype cycle and are not seeing the value that necessarily they would have done. So it's really important to do the hard work. Even when it comes to cloud, it's understanding what workloads you have, what technologies they're using. Does it make sense to move them? What are the risks associated with that? How much effort is it going to take to put all the regulations and controls in place? Designing, thinking ahead to where the technology is moving. So when people started moving to the cloud, if they'd thought about, or at least factored into their roadmap that AI is coming, they would have thought differently maybe about how and where they were putting their data. So I think a lot of this is just the planning side of it and understanding your environment, putting workloads where it makes most sense, thinking about what will give you the most value where you're applying AI. Not everything needs to be AI, as it were, and then learning and working your way up, as I said, I think earlier, around starting with the simplest stuff, building the skills, getting the wins, building on top of that. That's the way you get the return on investment, and the business will see there's value coming through, and then it will continue to invest, as opposed to, I spent all this money, didn't get a return, et cetera, which can sometimes happen. So that would be my guidance or advice, at least.
One thing COVID and ChatGPT told us, that don't talk about 5 years from now. We don't know what new technologies will emerge tomorrow and will disrupt everything that we are building today. But if I ask you, what do you think the next 2 to 3 years will look like for the public sector's journey with cloud and AI? Where do you expect to see the biggest breakthroughs?
I think we've sort of went through the cloud hype cycle. We've been through the AI hype cycle to some extent. I think with all of these things, cloud is now settled in. It's a fundamental part of everyone's technology. I think AI is heading the same way. I think people are working out where it makes sense to use, where maybe it doesn't. I think the whole data question is becoming really important now. So people have tried different strategies around, should I create some massive data lake, and it's like data's everywhere, you can't pull it all together centrally. So we're seeing some data fabric type approaches where people are seeing leave the data where it is, and working out different ways of giving their models or LLMs or the AI access to that data. So there's some of that which is I think building and transitioning. We're seeing a lot more changes in the regulation. So I think we had a little bit of a crypto thing going on, but because some of the regulations, especially in the US, are now catching up and regulating that space a lot more. Some of the banks I talked to are are now actively talking about how they get much more involved in that space, with digital currencies and things like that. So I think you're gonna see quite a lot of development in that space because of just how the regulations have improved it, and it's less of a wild west out there. And then, as you mentioned, I think quantum's always talked about, but I think it's becoming real. We have a lot more conversations now, less about the application, but more about how do I secure my data? Because one of the biggest issues with once quantum becomes available is all of our encryption methods could be broken, right? Because they're all based on number factorials, and that's what quantum computers are very good at solving for. So we're seeing lots of organizations now thinking about how they get quantum ready in terms of protecting their data now, even if it's 5, 6, 7, 10 years away. And we do feel it's that sort of time frame. So those are some of the things I think, at least I'm seeing in the environment.
Thank you so much for your insights. And this is a topic which is evolving. So I'd love to have you back on the show, but I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Blaine, for the opportunity. Take care. Bye-bye.
And for those watching, the public sector journey with AI and cloud is just a beginning. But security and compliance and citizen trust will remain non-negotiable. If your organization is also helping government agencies move to cloud and AI, we would love to hear your story. So please don't hesitate and reach out to our teams. You know where to find me. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more conversations. Thanks for watching.